For your gelatin lab, in addition to the supplies that you are taking home in your lab box, you are also going to need some specific materials. You'll have 2 containers in which to let the gelatin cool. You'll have a bag full of packets of sugar. You'll have food coloring and food flavoring. A tray for candy molds if you wish to use it, that part is optional. A couple of microwavable bowls, and some containers that you're going to set up yourself. So these are labeled already with the amount of citric acid and the amount of gelatin that I'm going to use in my experiment. You are going to have 2 different amounts of one of these if you are in groups A or C. If you are in group B, you're going to have the same amounts of these. You also have a dropper depending on what kind of flavoring you add. When you weigh out your materials, you're going to have the balance turned on. We want to use one of the balances that will give us 0.1 grams, so you can't use a balance that doesn't give you the decimal place on grams. You're going to take the container you're going to use and set it on the balance. Now notice this has a weight for itself, so we're going to do what's called tearing the balance. There's a button that says tear. We're going to press that, and that's going to put it at 0. So the only thing we're going to be weighing at this point is whatever we put in the cup. So if I'm going to weigh the gelatin, I first determine how much I want to weigh out. So I'm going to try and weigh out 2.5 grams of this, and I'm going to pour some in there. I'm going to stop and check. Nope, I'm not there yet. And continue to pour until I get to the right amount. Now, if for some reason I should overshoot, I can use a plastic spoon to take some of the gelatin out of the container and put it back in the pouch. Or you can just throw it away. Once you have measured out all of your gelatin and all of your citric acid, you can throw away any excess in the packet of gelatin. And you also want to make sure you put a lid on this with the appropriate label so that you know what it is and how much is there. In your lab box, you have a glass that is kind of like a shot glass that you can measure small amounts of liquids. You want to measure 45 milliliters of water. Make sure that as you are measuring this, you are down at the level of the liquid so that you can see the appropriate amount. So you shouldn't be able to see both the front and the back of the top of the liquid. It should just be one straight line across. So this is in between 40 and 50 milliliters. To begin with, I want to take 4 packets of sugar and put them in another container so they're ready to stir in, and I don't have to open the packets at the time. I've just used a cupcake paper here. You can just use any bowl or cup you happen to have around. And I want to have my citric acid ready to go. Now I'm not going to use these in the first step. I just want to know where they are so I can have them ready at the next step that we do. I'm going to add my 45 milliliters of water to my bowl, and if I want to, I can add some food coloring here. I don't want to add the flavoring at this point because flavoring tends to evaporate very readily when heated. Before you start adding any chemicals to the containers, it's important to label your containers and know where each part of the experiment is going to go. So I've decided that the containers that have purple on them are going to have 4.5 grams of gelatin, and the containers with blue on them are going to have 7 grams of gelatin. And I've kind of lined them up with the bowls that I'm using, and I may want to write down a note on my data sheet saying blue is equal to 7 grams and the pink bowl is equal to 4.5, so when things come out of the microwave I know what I'm doing. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be adding the gelatin to the mixture. It's important that you stir this for about 30 seconds before you move on to the next part. So when we stir, we want to make sure that we're not just going around in a circle because that tends to just move the lumps around. So you're going to do both in a circle and kind of go up and down across the liquid. Stir in one direction, stir in the other direction, stir back and forth, and continue this for about 30 seconds to make sure it's really well mixed. Now what you'll start to notice is that if you are using some of the larger amounts, particularly 7 grams or 10 grams, that you're going to kind of get a slushy sort of material, and that's fine. It will liquefy when you heat it. But you want to make sure that you have this stirred for 30 seconds, and just counting slowly in your head is fine. You don't have to have a stopwatch or anything. Just make sure it's good and stirred. And then any time that you are asked to stir things, this is what you should be doing, is you should be stirring for 30 seconds. Make sure it's really well mixed up. You're going to put your materials in the microwave. If there's a turntable inside the microwave, that probably will be the best because it will more evenly spread out the microwaves. If you have small bowls like group A and C, you can probably put both bowls in the microwave at the same time. For group B, since you're using different times and larger bowls, you're probably going to want to do the 2 experiments separately. If you are using a regular flavoring container, like this raspberry container, then you can use about 1/4 teaspoon of the extract. If you have one of these very tiny containers, these are super concentrated. So you're just going to use a pipette or a dropper like this and just put in 1 or 2 drops. It's risky to try and pour 1 or 2 drops because you can very easily make 1 or 2 drops turn into a big splash that will definitely make it too concentrated. After you add your citric acid and your sugar and your flavoring, you're going to again stir for 30 seconds until everything is well mixed. So you can see I've got the sugar still at the bottom there. And again, remember, don't just go around in a circle in one direction. You're going to want to change directions. You're going to want to go up and down, go side to side to really get it mixed, and just count slowly to 30, and that should be good mixing. At this point, you're going to pour into one of your rectangular containers up to the 1 centimeter mark. And if you desire, any materials you have left over, you can put into the candy mold to make individual gummies. Once your gelatin is in the container, make sure you grab the appropriate lid that's labeled to put on it. It's not real important that it be covered, but this is just a good way of keeping it labeled. You can lock the sides so that it doesn't spill, and you can either put it in the freezer for about 15 minutes or in the refrigerator for about 20 to 30 minutes. Now, if you're using the freezer, don't let it be in there for more than 15 minutes or it'll start to get icicles in it, and that can damage the proteins that are in there. Once you have left it in there for that amount of time, you can pull it out and do your measurements, or you can wait until the next day. It will solidify a little bit more overnight and give you a stronger gel if you wait overnight. Make sure that you clean up your dishes right away because the gelatin can be really hard to get out if you let it sit overnight. Warm water and a little bit of scrubbing can help. The plastic containers that you used to measure out your citric acid and gelatin can be thrown away. Once our gelatin has cooled, we're going to test the consistency, stretchiness, and taste. So this is probably the most difficult thing to be consistent from one group to the next. We'll try and set some parameters to keep it as consistent as possible, but remember that different people are going to pull harder or grip the gelatin in different ways. Our gelatin is about 6.5 centimeters across, maybe 7 centimeters across. We're going to try and cut it into about 1 centimeter strips. You're going to need at least 3 good strips. Now notice that the corners are rounded here, so we may want to try and avoid the corners and just cut off a thin strip from the corner and take strips from the middle. Our strips don't need to be perfect, just need to be about the same width across. We're going to take an average anyway, and you can use a knife or a spoon to lift one strip out. Notice I'm just leaving that thin piece with the rounded corners in the tray. I've trimmed off the ends because the ends were a little bit thinner from the sloped edges of the box. And now I'm measuring this with a ruler. I'm going to adjust it just a little bit because it looks like I have it not quite at the end there. So this looks like it is about 8.9 or 9 centimeters long. And what I'm going to do next is try and stretch it to see how far I can stretch it before it breaks. Now what I want to do is leave this end at the 0. So I'm going to hold that in place with my left hand, and this end I'm going to pull away. I'm going to see how far I can stretch this before it tears. So it looks like I got about to 12.5 centimeters, maybe just 12, before the piece tore. And I'm going to record that on my data table. And then I'm going to repeat this 2 more times. Once I have completed this with this set, then I'm going to try with my other gelatin that I prepared. Then after I've filled out my data table, I'm going to use Rocketbook to record and send that information to the other people in my group so that they can compare the various amounts of gelatin, the time that was used, or the citric acid, depending on which group you're in. The other thing you're going to want to do is taste the gummies, test them for consistency and flavor. So you can pull them out, do they hold together the way a gummy should? If you don't want to taste them, you can have a friend taste them. Things you're going to want to look for are, do they taste more like Jell-O than gelatin? So sometimes if we don't have enough gelatin or we haven't heated it properly, then it ends up being more of the consistency of gelatin. The citric acid is going to add a certain amount of sourness. So, you might write down, did you think it was too sour? Did you think it was not sour enough? Acids sometimes affect the flavors and also the consistency of things. So maybe if you're testing the amount of citric acid, you're also finding that you have different strengths with the different amounts of citric acid. So make notes of those things in your notebook as well.